Sorry, if you're speaking, cannot hear online. Excuse us, if someone's speaking, we cannot no longer hear online.
This one works.
Dr. Lee was hogging the microphone, ready to
Yes,
take the
thank you
stage
so much.
already.
Yes, we can hear
Well,
now. Thank you.
online, I'm delighted to welcome you as well to what we've recently restarted, I guess, as a powerful addition to the Lillian Carter Center portfolio in our global nursing research lecture series. So for over 2 decades now, the Lillian Carter Center has led the way in global health research and community-based initiatives. Many of you in the room have participated in a lot of our programs, and I'm sure online as well. This lecture series continues that legacy, honoring Lillian Carter, a nurse, Peace Corps volunteer, and mother of U.S. President, who was also committed to making the world a better place. We are pleased to have all of you here with us and excited about the role in this series will play in our global work. Dr. Karuki, Jacob, has been great at pulling these together and pulling all the pieces together, which is not easy in this school, I know. So please welcome Jacob to share his vision about the series and to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tricia. And thank you for all of you who were able to come here in person and for the 16 people who are with us online. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. This is a series that we actually started convening so that we can expose our community to thought leaders in global nursing research. And we just want them to share their excellence, what it takes to create thriving global research partnerships and connections. And we hope that by the end of the day, especially after today's presentation, this lecture is going to encourage our students. We have a number of PhD students here and also a few other graduates and our faculty and entire community to be more interested and probably more invested in global nursing research. And without spending more time, I want to invite our PhD student and the Vice President of the Global Nursing Council to come and introduce our keynote speaker, Raul Ruiz Perez. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Christopher Lee. Dr. Lee is a cardiovascular nurse scientist and the Berry Family Goldman Sachs Endowed Professor in Nursing at Boston College's William Connell School of Nursing. His career has focused on advancing our understanding of heart disease and improving long-term outcomes for patients and their families. He is internationally recognized for his work in heart failure self-care, symptom science, and patient and care provider dyadic research and in chronic conditions. His use of advanced statistical methods has further elevated his impact. Dr. Lee's research, supported by the NIH and the American Heart Association, has earned him numerous accolades, including induction to the Sigma Theta Tau International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame in 2024. He has published over 250 papers with more than 20,000 citations. A passionate advocate for global nursing science, Dr. Lee has served as a visiting professor at 9 international institutions and expanded the Connell School of Nursing global engagement to Australia, Japan, Portugal, Ireland, and the Philippines, and South Korea. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Christopher Lee.
Give me a second to get this chat here. All right, thank you very much for the warm invitation. It's actually really great to be back here. I've had the pleasure of working with the Lillian Carter Center now for several years. I also know several of you, which is really fun. In fact, when I saw the announcement about the dean's retirement, I recalled that I've known Linda since 2005, I think, or 2004. She was actually my associate dean for research during my PhD program, which is really kind of fun. And she ran this absolutely fabulous F-31 writing workshop. There were 7 of us that started. I was the only one that submitted. And therefore, I was the only one that got funded, right? The success rate of unsubmitted grants is still 0, as it turns out. So very happy to be here and to talk about something that's real fun. I actually gave a talk at NINR yesterday about a totally different topic. This is actually the one that resonates with me more, especially in the last 7 or 8 years than some of the topics about my science specifically. So thanks so much for the invitation. And it's wonderful, again, to see you, Jacob, as well. What I figured I'd do is just give you a little bit of my background. The more that I continue in my research, I think about the importance of positionality, like where we've come from, what makes us do what we do, what makes us think the way that we do, what's important in our work. I'll talk about my origins in the research. The transition to Boston College for me was really like formative in my ability to actually increase global science footprint way more than my work prior to my transition there in 2018. So I'll talk about what and then why that was the case. I will talk about strategies that have been helpful for me in my institution in terms of improving the global footprint, talk about the importance of partnerships and what they may look like, and then wrap it up with what kind of remains to be accomplished, if that sounds like a plan. Ooh, if I can get those slides to move. There we go. Oh, now there's a little bit of delay in the clicker, so give me 1 second here before I click it like 6 times. I am a Bostonian by birth and by this outrageous accent. This is a place I will be careful to slow my speech down and say my R's and things like that. My dad, pictured here, was born in South Boston. That's where he grew up in an incredibly racist and bigoted family. And during a time where there was incredible racial tension in South Boston. Many of you may have heard of South Boston desegregation busing. My father's actually first job was to teach calculus at South Boston High School, but that also meant for the first 2 hours of every day he ran a metal detector, because at the time there was about 800 students and about 4,000 uniformed police officers going to that school every day, under this fabulous idea that a way to get students of color from Dorchester and other places around Boston to get them a better education, why don't we expose them to the better education at South Boston at the time? That's what the busing really came from. Again, a great idea, but one that led to the worst race riots that Boston has actually ever seen since the Boston Massacre, which was several hundred years before. So tough times, tough tension, and my dad, again, grew up in the stress and the strain in a white family, racist family. The most iconic image actually from the busing of Boston is this one down the bottom. If you can't quite see it, it's a white protester holding an American flag about to impale a black protester with an American flag. It was taken by a white photographer, and it was called Soiling of Old Glory, meaning we are going to soil the flag once it's impaled through the chest of a black protester. This is the context in which my dad grew up. I mention this because, seemingly against all odds, my dad was a very peaceful person. He was like an ardent anti-racist ally and advocate. He was a supporter of social justice. And he instilled in me from a very young age, even though we came from a place where we didn't have much, that the biggest gift you could give to the world is sharing your intellect, sharing your time, even if you don't have money and other resources. So kind of an odd environment to come from this very peaceful advocate, peace-loving, social justice, social welfare mindset. I grew up in a town called Scituate, which has the distinction of being the most Irish town in the world outside of Ireland. Still does, interestingly enough. But what that meant for me is I grew up in a community that was homogeneously white, homogeneously Irish, and homogeneously Catholic. And that particular triad really set up the mindset of not only everyone I was related to, but pretty much everybody that I knew. I also grew up in a low-income household and an incredibly affluent community. The population of this town would quadruple in the summer, where affluent people would come and occupy their second and third home, and then during the school year kind of go back to their even more affluent community. And I say that especially like in retrospect now, thinking that I thought I grew up in a poor house until I started to do work globally. And I'm like, I did not grow up in a poor house, because I grew up in a house and my community did have resources and I had a family and we could eat and other things, right? But that's just kind of a perspective thing. Situate was also an interesting place too, because it would have been easy to kind of like get caught up into some of the bigotry that's part of those communities, and then again raised above that through that with guidance from my father and other people about the importance of giving back to communities, especially those that aren't your own. Now we're going backwards. All right, here we go. When I was 13, I met Sister Rose Marita, who's obviously the one with the habit in the middle, and then and Suzanne Rin, who's on the far side of this picture. This is the last time I had glorious hair, so this was a while ago. This was a long time ago now. But I met them both as part of my Eagle Scout project. I was in Scouts, and for Scouts, I organized a tour drive for a camp that was run by the Franciscan Sisters of the Atonement, for which Sister Rose Marita was a member, for underprivileged inner city children. It was in part sponsored by the Archdiocese of Boston as well, but it was mostly these nuns who ran this and did so for free and for their life's mission. And then Suzanne Rin was actually a camper at this camp when she was young, because she grew up in a real poor family in downtown Boston. And Suzanne came into fortune and later in her life and wanted to kind of like give back to the camp. So she volunteered with the camp a lot and volunteered for me to actually successfully launch an Eagle Scout project. And so Suzanne also was just a real key person in my formation and thinking about the importance of giving back. And to kind of overcoming where you were born and not even thinking about that in terms of where you want to put your eggs and how you want to spend your time. I found this picture while cleaning out my mother's house this summer for a listing, and I had not actually been in contact with Suzanne since like the late 80s. She was also my religious school teacher, which is kind of a fun thing. So I reached out to Suzanne. It's easy to find people on social media now, just to say, want to let you know I have a great life. I've been a nurse for almost 30 years. I love it. I spent a lot of my time giving back to the community, and how important it was you at the right time in my formation as somebody that altruistically wants to give a lot back to society. And as it turns out, she was a Boston College nursing grad. I had no idea when I was 13. Why would you care what anyone does for work when you're 13? But what kind of a small circle. So our alumni obviously loves this story. And I will say the last thing I remember of Suzanne Rin before our last contact was in our religious classes. She taught our CCD and Catholic religion. And I remember her saying to us, and again, we're very young at the time, that her greatest hope for us that we would continue kind of our journey in Catholicism. And she actually like warned us, like, be aware of the temptation to engage in practices like Buddhism. She had lost a friend to Buddhism, as she explained. What I didn't share with Suzanne is I actually took formal Buddhist vows in the mid-90s and engaged in that part of my daily practice. And I mention that too, specifically because, being Buddhist, there is a lot of time spent in contemplation about oneself, but there's also a lot of meta activity where you're actually thinking about how you can be a better citizen of the world and put better energy out to the world. So that's kind of a little bit of the upbringing. So fun story, especially for those of you who already knew me. My guess is you didn't know any of that. My origins in global research, lucky enough for me, started when I was a doctoral student. I worked with Barbara Rigo, who at Penn, and she had these fabulous connections to other scientists working in other areas of the globe. I had this area of heart failure self-care that I was interested in. I kept hearing people say that there are big gender differences in self-care. And I said, well, is it gender? Is it other things that we're picking up if we organize people and how they identify themselves as being male or female in this world? And so I kind of thought about this initiative, like answering this question, but took advantage of an opportunity to work with some international colleagues, Joan Swano from Thailand, 2 colleagues from Australia at the time, Andrea Driscoll here, and then the senior author, Linda Worrell Carter from Australia, because I was really interested in the cultural aspects of this. So we did this cross-sectional study internationally where we collected the same information in our communities. This was a great opportunity for me to first lead an international research initiative and then kind of set the stage for me liking that, like me thinking that learning about how self-care works in heart failure and the influence of intersectional aspects like gender and culture, the importance of that. So this was kind of the start of a lot of things to come for me. I completed my postdoctoral research fellowship. I did an academic and industry partnership. And what that meant is I worked with a company that helped European pharmaceutical companies engage in the research process, design effective protocols for phase 4 and 5 pharmacoepidemiologic trials. I spent a lot of time in Belgium, back and forth between the US and Belgium at the time. I had actually never been outside of the country except to support my climbing habit at the time. I spent a lot of time in South America, a lot of time in Mexico, high altitude mountaineering, but I'd actually never been out of the country for work. And this was really my exposure to how things function totally differently in a European nation than they do in the US with respect to everything related to pharmaceutical industry. And then this obviously set the stage for me to do a lot more. I did a lot of work internationally, spent a lot of time in Germany and France, the UK, organizing some of these research protocols, again, more from like a scientific advisory capacity. So at this point, I was really helping research teams elsewhere in the country make sure that they were using the most advanced statistical approaches and that they were using the best approaches to rigor and trustworthiness of the research. So it was kind of nice as a scientific advisor to really contribute to these teams and to start engaging with the research teams on the ground in many different countries. When I was at Oregon Health and Science University, where I was lucky enough to meet Kim and a whole lot of other fabulous colleagues, I started to be more connected with some international teams. One led by Ercole Bologna was doing work in Italy in the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. And I started to realize that we, meaning my team in the US and their team in Italy, had these amazingly complementary abilities to engage in research. We were really pushing analytically what we were doing, statistically, conceptually, theoretically. We were hybridizing a lot of our ideas at the time, and we really had an analytic know-how and powerhouses of analyses, and they just simply did not. On the other hand, they had the ability to generate these massive amounts of data that would not ever be possible in the US. In fact, like this study was of 504 people with heart failure and 504 of their care partners that helped them manage the heart failure. They collected it as part of someone's dissertation. In the US, it would have been a $10 million study. So they had this powerhouse, their social capital that they exert. They just ask friends to recruit for them. They do it. You know, that's not how things work in the US, as we know. It's actually illegal to remunerate people that participate in research in Italy. Yet Americans like to be paid for their time, compensated for the time. There are a lot of difference, but we really use this as an opportunity to say, I think this can be like a marriage made in heaven here, where we'll be able to help you with like the analytics. And if you can help us like with the recruitment, then I think we can come up with a strategy that's mutually beneficial, but it's really pairing like our analytic powerhouse with your ability to actually recruit in a way that we tried to get this stuff funded all the time. But you're really talking about like multiple sequential R01s to be able to generate this much data. So we came up with like 3 major activities that we would do. At this time, we were doing all their analyses for them. They were doing all the recruitment. That changed later in the course of our trajectory together, which is great. And then I was just noticing on this paper, Julie Bidwell is on this paper, who was here for a bit, and then also my trainee back at OHSU. But for me, this was like the first big international initiative that I really also wanted to like steer myself. I wanted to have a leadership role in this, and then partner really with Ercole Bologna, who I still collaborate with all the time. And again, in a way that's like mutually beneficial. Before I left OHSU, I actually engaged in my first global visiting professorship. Dr. Linda Worrell-Carter, with whom I had worked on that first study at Penn, is this fabulous cardiovascular neuroscientist in Australia. She had actually left academics and started her own foundation. It's called the Her Heart Foundation. And then the whole mission of the Her Heart Foundation is to raise awareness of cardiovascular risk among women in Australia. She was doing absolutely fabulous work as a scientist and now as kind of a leader of this non-for-profit. So I spent time with her in Australia to learn about what that transition was from academics to industry to foundation work, and then to see if there was a way that we could expand Her Heart to more of a global perspective. But up until this time, this was the only visiting professorship I had globally. And literally as I landed in Australia for this visiting professorship, I got the call to consider my recruitment to Boston College. So there was kind of a quick turnaround, taking on a leadership role at Boston College. So then the transition to Boston College, I'm just going to outline kind of like where I was at that time. Again, as kind of a pivot point to how this really changed since I've been at BC. When I transitioned, I completed one visiting professorship, yes. It was with a non-for-profit, it wasn't even academic, and it was great, but I didn't have much experience in that. Yes, I had engaged in some global research, but it was limited. It was mostly collaborative, like with my colleagues from Thailand and Australia. It was us trying to like help advance the scientific capacity of a research group in Italy. And then in the work with industry, it was more consultative. I was trying to help steer their science a bit. And then when I landed in Boston College in 2018, I took on the role of Associate Dean for Research. And in the process of doing that, I interviewed everyone that did research there. And the first question I asked them is, for what is Boston College known regarding research? And the number one answer that I got is, we are not. And I thought to myself, I am like a day one ADR. I have a lot of work to do here. But also in the process of interviewing folks, I learned about their very long history of global engagement. A lot of the fact that we're doing global research, they just didn't like talk about it, or they weren't asked to talk about it. It wasn't really promoted in any meaningful way. So there was a lot to learn there. And the limited footprint that Boston College did have at the time was mostly service learning. And then, at the time especially, it was really like brigade-oriented, mission-style service immersion trips. And so that led for me to think about if we can either build upon those to infuse some research, or just get better at disambiguating what's research versus service learning. That's kind of an important step for me. But I thought I came into a school that was actually in a better place in terms of both research and global footprint, and I was wrong. So I came up with what I'll now call like the Lee Manifesto. And manifestos, I guess, are something you're supposed to like have, but not share all of it. I think I'm just being transparent here. This is what I wanted to accomplish. First, I transitioned to a institution that's largely undergraduate focused, as is Boston College. It's also Jesuit and Catholic. There's this fabulous theologian, Michael Himes, who passed away a few years ago, that came up with a way of processing three very formative questions. The first is, what are you good at? The second is, what brings you joy? And then the third is, how can you be in the best service of the men and women around you? And then I'd never even heard that before I started working at BC, but it actually is a way to like help guide contemplation with respect to big initiatives to take on, especially. Like, well, why are we doing any of this? Am I good at this? What does the university and the community need me to do? I think that's how I actually got into this global work, kind of like by happenstance, I have to say. But then I thought to myself, can we improve our global footprint at the same time we're trying to actually accelerate like our national reputation and our strength as a school for research? To me, those things can go hand in hand. And since we're going to embark on this big growth mode with respect to research, can we also increase the global footprint at the same time? One of the things I felt I needed to do was to really articulate goals of partnerships, because up until that point, we'd had a lot of partnerships. In some instances, we had some piece of paper somewhere that said what we were going to do. Other places, we had formal MOUs that we were totally ignoring. To me, coming into that, I really wanted to sort that out and then think about our global partners in three levels. One, are there reach partners? Are there schools that are more highly ranked, more known for research than us internationally, that we would want to partner with, that would actually be beneficial for us? And yes, that may take more of a timeline, like a ramping up process to formalize, but why not? Like, why would we always just go for sister schools? Let's ramp up our game a little bit. Then the parallel partners, I think this is where we kind of had a lot, where, should we focus on mutual benefit? Are there students that we can mentor in common? Are there projects that we can do together? Is there intellectual exchanges that might be enough to be stimulating between us? Are there opportunities for collaboration? And then the third, we had not actually done too much of this. Like, are there service partners? Are there partners in our network, or that partners in our network that we want to have, where it's really going to be mostly give? Because we are a resource institution, We are also, it's part of a Jesuit mission too, like who needs the most help in our network. So I'll talk about some examples of those partnerships kind of at each one of those levels. And then the third, as I mentioned, can we kind of differentiate the clinical immersion trips from the research? So strategies to help me kind of on this manifesto. One, as I started to seek out visiting professorships, I really wanted to know how nursing science was being done elsewhere in the world. I hadn't really thought too much about visiting professorships other than the one I had attended. So we started kind of in low-hanging fruit. We had worked with colleagues from University of Rome, Tor Vergata. Mostly up until this point, we had really done their analysis for them and they had done the recruiting. So we thought to ourselves, can we go get your team up and running so that you can actually do this yourself independently? Like we don't have to keep doing your analysis for you. Better to train a lot of your students in these techniques that we're using so that your team can be kind of more self-sufficient. And so that was the purpose of our visiting professorship there in 2019. I also took advantage of another colleague that was wanting to go for promotion. At Boston College, to be promoted to a full professor, you have to have multiple global partnerships. Kim and I have talked about that. It is actually in our doctrine. You cannot be a full professor unless you have multiple global partnerships. So I took advantage of this one to help another colleague secure that that would be her multiple, quote unquote, multiple global partnership. At Wrocław Medical University, I had worked with a colleague there for several years, but again, wanting to make sure that we could in this way help them increase their kind of analytic capacity to write grants, to process information that they've already collected, and to kind of accelerate their pathway of securing European funding for their great work that they were doing there. Wrocław Medical University is actually a fascinating place. It's nursing, midwifery, and paramedicine that are all taught. They're also made the decision several years ago to teach all their courses, or at least make their programs available in English. So it's also like the go-to place for a lot of nurses working in European nations that want to speak English enough to work in a country like Poland. Poland actually also pays their nurses more than any other European Union country. Another one is Osaka Prefecture University. They had done some amazing work in transitions. So they had a grant from the federal government to consult with faculty to come and talk about their work with helping folks transition from hospital to home, especially with chronic illnesses like heart failure. All these three were funded visiting professorships. Australian Catholic University was one of our big global partners, but we hadn't actually done anything together. It was kind of like a handshake MOU that existed for many years, and it said something like, we will collaborate, which a lot of these like major MOUs, that's sometimes what they do say. Australian Catholic University funded me for 3 years to partner with them to kind of like ramp up their research mission, even talk about their research in a more consolidated way to kind of come up with a framework of their strengths. And then to work with some of their early career faculty as well. With Trinity College, this is part of our, I called this a REACH partnership to begin with, where over the last several years, we've engaged with a number of activities that I'll explicate a little bit more about in a few minutes. Xavier University was the one that I chose to be our service partner. Xavier University is in the southern Philippines, what they call CDOC, Cagayan de Oro City. They are in kind of our sister network in terms of Jesuit schools around the world, a very low resourced institution, fabulous undergraduate students, fabulous integrated graduate studies, and their faculty, they're just absolutely amazing. I'll talk about what we've done with Xavier too as kind of our service partner over the last couple of years. I was just in Perth, which is an antipode to Boston. You can't get any further away from that in the globe. In the fall of just last year. Spent 2 weeks with them talking about early career mentoring, scientific development, and then also some of the analytics that I use. They wanted a lot of detailed seminars and some of the statistical approaches I use as well. Then Católica University in Portugal, we had done some work with them for several years. I got an email from my colleague there yesterday that they just started 61 PhD students in their current cohort. Can you imagine having 61 PhD students? We have 4 that are on fellowship. We have some part-time students. I'm like, how are you going to do this? Like, I love them and I love that institution. But when I saw that, I was like, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think this is going to go well. Limited resources and who can mentor these folks, right? I mean, Then in Sophia University, Sophia University is also in our partnership. We had actually not done too much work with any Japanese university, but now with Osaka and Sophia, we have a bit of a network there where we're actually starting to do some collaborative research, which is great. And then I'm back to Wrocław University as of October the 1st again. And I'll tell you why in a couple of slides as well. So visiting professorships was a good way for me and for my colleagues to think about, if you haven't done much global research, this is actually a great way to just get going in it, minimally to get colleagues, to get contacts, to see what nursing is in another country, to see what nursing research is in another country, to understand what their priorities are, so that you can make sure that the work is truly mutually beneficial and not kind of patriarchal like a lot of it has been. The other thing that I did is I joined this International Center for Self-Care Research. It was an Australian Catholic University funded think tank of people around the globe that had an expertise in self-care of heart failure, but also other chronic illnesses. Initially, it was just multiple meetings in person together to kind of summarize where we were in the state of the science at the time. So a few key papers that came out of that. You'll notice Sandy Dunbar is on these too, because she was a member of this International Center for Self-Care Research as well. ACU funded this for, I think, 5 or 6 years and then defunded it. So it is still kind of alive and well at Linköping University. The link at the bottom is that one, if you want to see kind of what the center is doing now. In addition to the center funding, they also funded a study called the MOMENT study, which is a study done in the US, Sweden, Italy, and the Netherlands. We're just starting to kind of like publish all the products from that MOMENT study, but this is another international study that I was a contributor to. I didn't lead this one by any means, but was a contributor to the science for these. But again, this was funded by Australian Catholic University as well. During COVID, we had to think about what we wanted to do. Everybody did. It was like an existential crisis. It was a work crisis. It was a leadership crisis. Crises of many origins. There was a project that I really wanted to continue with this International Center for Self-Care group, where we were trying to summarize the world's literature around a few topics. And there was a scoping review completed where they looked at all the world's evidence in terms of trials, where the intention of it was to improve self-care. I wanted to look at that information and say, in addition to evidence about how it may or may not have proved self-care, do we know that these interventions actually improve clinical outcomes? That's kind of always been my thing in self-care research. Do we have evidence that improves quality of life, reduces blood pressure, improves hemoglobin A1C? It's nice that you improve the behaviors, but have we budged this clinically? Unfortunately, this was a team where everyone was really outstretched. There's actually 4 postdocs on this team, some senior investigators like myself. And then this is the only project that I actually begged my wife to help me finish. I hope it's the only one that I ever have to say that. So on this list is Elizabeth Farry, that's my wife. And I was probably in tears about one night saying, I can't do this anymore. And she's like, can I help you? As she often does. And I think to myself, if you can look up to see in table 2, what's the standard deviation for this effect size, and I'll put it in the computer. That's what we did for like a day or 2 and finished it up. So she's an attorney, a litigator by trade. So she loved the writing of it too, and kind of loved the details. Attorneys love to learn new things. Actually, their skill is to learn more than it is to do anything else. Interestingly enough, in this journal, I should disclose I'm an associate editor for this journal too. They require that you have to have an affiliation. My wife doesn't work now. But my wife is the queen of unsolicited advice, not just personally, like she's an attorney too. So we had to essentially make up an affiliation for her, otherwise the paper wouldn't accept her name. So we made up a company, Unsolicited Advisors. So it's an inside joke. So if you look on the paper, if you look at affiliation G, it is Unsolicited Advisors in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. So you got to have fun when you're trying to figure out how anyone's going to continue in this career. Thankfully, everyone in this paper survived COVID well and continued to be able to do some fabulous research themselves. Another thing that I did is I took advantage of university resources in a way that other folks at the School of Nursing had not done. Nobody was aware that we had visiting professorships, we had visiting scholars. We could bring students with us and to stay over the summer at the expense of the university, not the school. We took advantage of visiting scholars, professors that we wanted to work with as well. So this Julia Locatelli is somebody that I continue to work with. As a PhD student, she had expertise in interoception, which is something I really wanted to learn more about. So together, we helped her apply for a BC-wide fellowship program. She spent the summer of 2023 working with me and my team there. And it was really mutual. Like, yes, she was at an earlier phase of her career, but oh my gosh, did I learn a lot about interoception from her. And then similarly, we asked Dr. Chu from Yonsei University, which again was a partner that we wanted to have as a reach partner. They are like a powerhouse of research. And then Dr. Chu has an expertise in psychological nursing. And then she's done some absolutely fabulous biological work with PTSD among North Korean defectors that come to South Korea. And so her time spent with me in our lab was thinking about the role of interoception in chronic illness. But I also helped her figure out a lot about the biomarkers that she was using for PTSD. So for example, if you are a South Korean defector, you have very low levels of cortisol. And that's because your processes of synthesizing and absorbing cortisol have just been on overdrive for so long. It's not actually a sign of stress as it would be like in you and me, for example. So good opportunities, again, thinking about what resources are available to you outside your school and then just take advantage of them. And Dr. Chu and I do some great work collaboratively now in Korea. And one of the projects that came from us collectively, and this is kind of the fun part, if you have a pre-doctoral student who's a fellow and you have a visiting fellow, we started to come up with ideas together and then launch this really quick study so that we could look at actually an aspect of interoception in people with chronic cardiovascular disease. And then this was really like the merging of the minds of both of us. But it was also an opportunity that I asked our Australian colleagues to join because they essentially replicated the protocol in Australia. So we could run this study essentially in 2 places simultaneously. So fabulous opportunity, not just to involve international colleagues directly involved with the scholarships, but also those that could use the help and just re-protocolize it to use in a different place. So I'll talk about the partnerships a little bit. As I mentioned, Trinity I first viewed as kind of a reach partnership. In the process of working with them, I think it's more of a peer partnership now. But we started a process in 2023 where we just started with like some intellectual exchange in the spring where we said, let's take 5 of our faculty. They'll do kind of a blitz presentation of their work. You can do the same. We'll alternate. Let's see how that goes. And people just loved it. They loved it. We loved it. And we saw that, BC had some complementary analytic expertise compared to with theirs. We are heavy hitting on quantitative. We are terrible at mixed methods and qualitative work. They're better known for their fabulous qualitative work. So that we wouldn't have known unless we had had that kind of initial session, very low hanging fruit. In the fall, we actually signed a major MOU with them fall of 23. And then interestingly enough, this MOU only mentions law and nursing, which is kind of a victory for us as a school, because those are the 2 schools that had the biggest area of connectivity with Trinity. Our School of Law had other partners in the UK, but after Brexit, they really needed a partner that studied European law. In the UK, you don't study European law anymore, you study UK law. So it was kind of a loss and then a regain for our School of Law to also find this. And then we keep this going periodically. We just had a Methods Masters presentation with them this spring where we had our ADR as a health economist talk about the kind of nuts and bolts of health economics. I talked about latent growth mixture modeling. They had this fabulous presentation on true data integration in mixed methods. So this is kind of a partnership that's, again, probably more on that level of mutual contributions and collegiality than it is now a reach school. And then Fintan Sheeran moved on to another university and is now desperately asking us to be involved with them as well in Ireland. Another kind of peer partnership is Católica in Portugal. We've actually had like a long-standing relationship with this university, and it was mostly around nursing diagnoses. So I'm not so sure the last time you thought of, read one, had to write one, but nursing diagnoses were something that I did in school, like in undergrad. I remember seeing them in clinical practice once. I worked at a hospital where some of our nursing notes, we needed to include nursing diagnoses language. The headquarters of the North American Association of Nursing Diagnoses was actually at Boston College for a long time. And then most of our foreign partners, this is like a big deal to them still. Like my Italian colleagues use it all the time. People do their dissertation to generate a new nursing diagnoses. There's a lot more integration, like can we surface the language of nursing practice from electronic medical records and do it in nursing diagnoses? We've kind of moved beyond that. It's very important though to our global partners, so I'm not trying to minimize it, but we wouldn't even consider that science really anymore here. So one of the things that we had to do with this partnership in 2023, my dean and I went and we said, love the partnership, we really got to change focus though. Like it can't be about nursing diagnoses anymore. Like we don't really do that in the US. It's not helping advance our practice. It's not helping us advance our science at all. So can we think about things that we do want to do? Can we focus on intellectual exchange? Can we focus on scientific exchange? Can we mentor PhD students in common? Can we write grants together to support the work that we want to do? And that's actually was like a great pivot. And then in 2014, several of us presented at their international seminar on nursing research. We just had a first BC Católica fellowship funded by the Portuguese government for one of the PhD students we have in common. We've submitted FLAG grants, or a way for them to fund collaborative agreements between institutions. So that pivot was kind of an important one. I didn't know how it was going to go. I thought for a while they would just say, forget it then. But it's actually been really great to just be honest about what we could and would want to do with you moving forward. And then it's been really great. I have to say, stepping into the role as the global liaison for the School of Nursing, one of the hardest things that I had to do is to work with an institution that had in the past been promised like the moon in terms of what BC would do for them. So there was an institution, for example, when I stepped into this role, that they were told that our faculty would help them start a master's and PhD program and that we would teach in it. I said, well, like, how will you ever promise that? So, you know, hard thing to do, but I had to say, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. Everything that's in our MOU, we can't do any of it. It's not like we can do some of it, none of it. You should never have been promised. Actually, the person that promised you that was never in a position of authority to be a spokesperson for the university in that regard. So tough times there, but no, we can't at all. This one, where there's a lot to salvage from it still, and then we could keep going, which is great. And then a service partner, I mentioned the Xavier University. This started with me cold emailing their dean and then saying, you were trying, as a university, we're trying to increase our footprint in that region of the world. We've never really done that much work there. We have some contact through Manila, a little bit in Jakarta. But this is a Jesuit nursing school in the southern Philippines. It looked like they didn't have many resources. Can we work with you? You tell us what you need and let's see what we can deliver. So it really started like totally non-committal, as it has to. Let's say if we were to engage in a partnership with you, what is it that you would need? And they were very explicit and said, we'd love to hear what state-of-the-art simulation looks like in the US. We're building a brand new building. We don't actually know what to put in it. I wish I had room to show you like what the pictures of their current simulation lab looks like. It's old suction cup connections to the EKG and a defibrillator that I wouldn't have even seen at all in my practice. I've been a nurse for almost 30 years. The other was about ethics. They really were wanting to engage more in research and wanted to make sure that they're doing it in an ethically responsible way. They haven't published that much. So are there tips and tricks that we could have the folks on our faculty who publish a lot and who are editors help share with them so that it would be less of a daunting task and to start co-writing together. And then their institutional review board is functioning in kind of an antiquated way. So it was really like, what should a current IRB look like? What should it function be? Who should be on the IRB? So some of this, we started a seminar series in 2023. I just asked faculty, would you be interested in doing this? Everyone I asked said, yeah, 100%. It's very low lift, right, to spend an hour with somebody remotely. And then they just loved it so much that in 2024, we planned a visit there where Dr. Corinne Juergens and I spent a week teaching in their undergraduate curriculum, which was just amazing. And then also working mostly with like senior level administrators at the university and try to increase their research infrastructure. So we said, okay, do you use REDCap? because they are eligible to be a Red Cap partner at that institution. They'd never heard it, never mind used it. Simple low-hanging fruit like that. Or there's some things that we can change in your IRB process. Corinne's on our IRB at BC. She asked like, well, what's your timeline for an expedited review? It's 6 months, you know? It's things like that that we could just say, you know, current practice is this, really like fabulous and really receptive. And then, wow, is it amazing to teach in the undergrad students too. Half of their students actually, once they finish nursing, they go into medical school. So that's like a pathway in the Philippines, and then they lose almost 90% of their students to placement in the US or other countries, as you probably know. So the faculty that also stay, they stay there because altruistically they want to give back to their community. The nurses who stay in the Philippines, it's really just out of wanting to give back to the community. Otherwise, they would have a lot better opportunities abroad. And then their graduate studies is interdisciplinary. I gave a talk in 2024, their graduation keynote, and it was amazing because you had people from math and philosophy and physics and economics, all like equally excited about things like big data as were the nursing students. So super fun. So this is still what I would call our service partner. Can't wait to get back. A couple other growth opportunities. I mentioned Wrocław Medical University. You know, since I first worked with them in 2019, they got multiple Opus grants. These are really big European grants. That's great. But you'll often see as you're working with partners that are kind of in a growth mode, they may have a success and then they have kind of trouble operationalizing it, right? Because they've actually never done this. And a lot of it is really like around the business of research. It's like, how do you manage the budget? Who's keeping track of whether expenses are approved or not? And they have such a publication backlog. So now that they've actually done the work, they actually don't even know what to do with all the data that they're sitting on. So they've asked Dr. Ercole Valonia from Torre Vergata and myself to come back and join them as visiting faculty, really to help them lead the process of getting out of the backlog and then help transitioning their previously funded Opus grants to additional Opus grants, since they've had like so much success in this way. And that's really fun too, because none of this work will I lead, none of this work will Ercole lead. That's not what we're in it for, but it's gonna rapidly increase their publication productivity. Just as an example, with this group alone, I think I have 8 publications this year, and that's just with that work with them. And then the other is, I mentioned Sophia University. They are like masters of COIL. I don't know if you use COIL here. These are these collaborative online learning courses. Sometimes they're just lectures. They have done this in an incredible way. So when somebody from Sophia gives one of these COIL talks, it's just like an online platform. There's thousands of participants, and they come from all over Thailand, all over the Philippines, from Mongolia, China, Japan. They are really coming from everywhere. I experimented and did a couple of these with Sophia, and they're just amazing opportunities. Most of us in the US wouldn't think of these at all. You may get asked to contribute to one of these. This is me last day. I'm giving a COIL talk from Sophia, Japan. And they just asked me to talk about like heart failure. What's the status of heart failure in the United States? So simple topics, but with profound global importance. And then they just love this stuff. So if you're looking for other potential opportunities, these COIL courses can be great. They also offer like full semester courses. We're not in a position to do that because there's no financial exchange, there's no time protection to do this. But for the lectures every once in a while, they're really fabulous. So we went from an institution that really had a few service immersion trips, a few global partnerships. The last count, we have 44. That means like formally executed MOUs, or 44 foreign institutions in 44 countries, I should say. We have many more agreements with, so for example, in Japan and Australia, we have several, same as in Italy. So then what remains to be accomplished? Well, you know this as well as we do. There's so much uncertainty around the funding of global research. For now, funding from international sources has actually been working okay. As investigators, like we have to be careful about that and how we disclose, especially if we have federal money as well. So for example, I started a new professorship with Wrocław Medical University on October 1. I have to report that to the NIH on October 1. So there's tricks if you have federal funding, even if it's totally unrelated to that make it a little tricky. But a lot of foreign institutions have not suffered the kind of fluctuation in the funding and the funding certainty as we have. So sometimes it's easier to go to them for the funding of the source. You know, there's this phrase, you know, no margin, no mission. institutions have to think about themselves, like, is it really part of our mission to engage in global work? And if it is, then there should be like sources of resources available for that, right? So if it truly is not just performative part of a strategy, then it should be something that you are actually trying to accomplish as a faculty. To me, it's been really important to be explicit about expectations of the global partnership. So I mentioned a couple examples there, but with all of the global partners to just periodically check in and say, is this working? Are there things that we have to do differently? Are MOUs up? Should we edit the language? Should we terminate the MOU? Do we need an MOU? Those are the conversations I like to have with partners to just make sure that, that it is still mutually beneficial. I talked about expectations around global research. At some places, it is an expectation that faculty will engage in global research such that it is criteria for promotion. I don't think it is here. Is that, yeah, it's in the language, okay. Yeah, but like at BC, it's the letter of the law. Like I actually had a conversation with our provost and said, would it be possible to promote somebody if they did not have global partnerships? And he just said, no. Yeah. Otherwise, how could you show that your work is exemplary if you haven't had the global impact? So something to think about. And then engaging in global research while maintaining federal funding. That's why I mentioned that little caveat about like you have to be careful about what to disclose and when to disclose. And then that's definitely a moving target. As I mentioned, I gave a talk at NIH yesterday, and what was even coming out yesterday was all news. A lot of it was news to me, so moving target there. But for now, just be careful about disclosing. And then for the final part about the service immersion trips, I don't have too much to do with those because they're largely managed by other people at BC. But one of the things that we've really been trying to be mindful of is the whole, movement in global public health to be, a decolonized process. This is a great paper if you haven't seen this one about decolonizing study abroad programs for nursing in undergrad to low-income countries, because that's almost always where they are. We've just taken this opportunity, this literature, this movement from global public health to think about what it is we're trying to accomplish there, to be mindful, are we just engaging in brigade healthcare delivery and then leaving, where some other school can go in next week and do brigade healthcare? Or, are we trying to actually like work with the community around what their needs are? So if you are unaware of the initiative, it's really come from public health broadly, but in nursing, there's some really specific literature on the topic that we found to be quite helpful. All right, so at that point, I thank you very much for your attention. Thanks for tolerating the accent and the rate of speech. If there are any questions that I can answer for you, I'd be very happy to do so now. And we'll keep an eye on those that are on the Zoom as well. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so I think we can think about disclosures really in two ways. One is to just make sure the work that you're doing that's outside of your faculty work is disclosed to your institution. So that's one, because institutions really vary on what that looks like and how often you have to do it. For those of us that have federal funding, we also have to disclose in several instances if we have any type of foreign partnership, whether there's a financial exchange or not. And then there's two places where that can be really tricky. One is on your biosketch, and the other is on your other support. So on your biosketch, you have to disclose every foreign relationship you have literally ever had. Again, if there's been a financial exchange or not, because if they catch you, meaning NIH, when they are reviewing this and say, we know that this person actually had this affiliation that they have omitted, it's big trouble for you, and it's actually big trouble for your university. Because it means like you've either intentionally tried to cover that up, even if it's just an honest mistake, or it means your institution doesn't have sufficient processes to make sure that you have been transparent in your disclosure. So the biosketch is a tricky spot for that. The other one that's even a bigger deal is the other support. So on your other support, you also have to list every foreign affiliation that you have currently. You don't have to do them in the past. And it does have to say, like, is there financial exchanges or not? If you do have one where there is a financial exchange, even if they're reimbursing you for travel, if there's a stipend involved with those, not only do you have to disclose it, electronically sign it, you also have to put your contract with that organization at the end of the other support form. That's what I mean. It's a lot to it. Yeah. Right. I have to say, like, most institutions are like, great, keep up the international work. Do whatever you want, as long as it's your day of the 1 day a week, you're allowed to do whatever you want, you know, as long as it's not abutting against the conflict of commitment, like you said. So institutions like Emory, like BC, tend to be very supportive of that because it's part of their mission too, to have faculty engaged in global work. NIH is not supportive in that. And it's their business to intentionally try to catch people in non-disclosure. And it really came from like the talent program initiative. Like, that's the concern. The concern is that you are now being hired, given money, given some sort of resource by a foreign entity that's trying to engage in intellectual sabotage. That's the NIH concern. From their own language, this isn't my opinion, but that's what they say. And because there were many instances where investigators were given a lot of discretionary money, and in exchange, there was intellectual sabotage that was occurring, espionage. They were stealing ideas from US institutions. So the threat's kind of real, and it's based on some legitimate cases. It's way overgeneralized, so now it applies to every foreign partnership. And then NIH actually vets institutions too. They actually used to keep what I call the naughty and a nice list. They would keep a list of institutions you could not do anything with, and they would keep a list of institutions that have gone through the process of formal vetting. So for example, when I took when I got my visiting professorship at Australian Catholic University, it was also when I got an appointment to National Advisory Council for Nursing Research. My appointment to the National Advisory Council was held up for 9 months until they could clear ACU as being an institution that's not directly sponsored by the Australian federal government. Because if it was, I would have to choose one or the other. That list is not publicly available anymore, the naughty nice list, because it changes. Institutions change. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So I should have done that before. I've given some talks in my life, so I should have remembered, but thank you. Jacob was asking about identification of partners, like how do you know which ones to go for? How do you vet them? And the third part of the question was like, how many faculty are kind of engaged in this, and how does that all work? At BC, it's a little bit easier to identify foreign partnerships because by and large, but with some big exceptions, they like to partner with schools that are in like a organization called IFCU, International Federation of Catholic Universities. So that would be their preference, is universities that are Catholic and or Jesuit. And then their higher level of preference would be that it's an institution that belongs to an organization of research universities that are within that. It's another acronym. It's the Strategic Alliance of Catholic Research Universities. So they make it easier for us to narrow down. You know, having said that, Trinity, if you know anything about Trinity's history, it was actually started when people overthrew and stole the land of a small Jesuit community. That was the origins of it. So you would think, well, the Jesuits aren't going to be so happy about that partnership. But, you know, with Brexit, they're a fabulous gateway to the EU. And then, yes, it's been several hundred years since that happened, so people are starting to get over it now. And then this would be just from a strategic standpoint, like a great kind of reach / parallel one, and an institution where like that was actually a hard one to land on the MOU. So you asked how it's going. I think I'll answer that last. The vetting is really almost always just like some sort of communication with multiple people from your team and multiple people from their team, totally non-committal conversation. If we were to engage in a relationship, what do you think that might look like? What might we offer you? What might you offer us in exchange? That has to be like the most non-committal conversation that ever occurs, because otherwise, you know, you're getting your hopes up, you're getting their hopes up. And then in some instances, it's actually a no-go after that conversation. So the vetting usually starts that way. And then we have a global office like university-wide like you do. I often vet it very early in the process to say, we had a conversation with this university. Is this one, like, do you think, based on what I can recall from our conversation, that it would be a benefit for us to pursue it at all? The faculty involved with the partnerships differ, I have to say. For the low-hanging endeavors like the intellectual exchange, we have, we've probably had half of our research faculty contribute to those in some meaningful way. Sometimes we actually like switch gears with Trinity. We alternate between a PhD student-oriented session and a faculty-oriented session. So we've also involved a lot of their PhD students and our PhD students as well. And the same is true with Católica in Portugal. So we're not just making about us, the current faculty, we're making about future faculty of the world. How to manage it all, it's actually not easy because sometimes it's like managing the imbalances that are occurring in these, because you can't do all of them all the time. Even if you just looked at the MOUs you had, like you can't actually do all that all the time. So it really depends with what resources available. I'm very transparent in conversations with my dean to say, this is what I think should be our priorities. Do you think that these should be our priorities? So like the vetting is also internally just to say, can we do this right now? A good example with the Philippines, like Americans are not actually encouraged to travel to that part of the Philippines now because of a tragic incident that occurred with a tourist. And now it just has too high of a mark for the State Department. So we can't go there in the Philippines. We certainly can't bring students to that part of the Philippines now. We're hoping we're able to do in the future. But that's also good because we actually don't have the resources to send 2 faculty there for a week. It's a $20,000 expenditure, right? So it's okay right now that we can't go there. We can do some things that are virtually. Yeah, the success of them, I think it's something that you have to evaluate like annually. Think like of all the partnerships you have, like how are they going? A little bit of a dashboarding, I think that way helps. Did I answer all the questions? I think so. Yeah. Okay. Oh, good. Or maybe if she can type it or something.
Hi, this is Sandy. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Sandy.
Super presentation. I just love the way that your research and career have expanded into this global network and perspective and leadership for your faculty. The quick question I had for you was whether you had ever leveraged the Fulbright resources for faculty fellowships and for students. And just if so, how did that go? I don't know if those resources are even going to be available in the future. That's, I guess, questionable, but just thinking about those types of opportunities.
Yeah, sir, I think we've taken better advantage. It's a great question and always great to hear your voice, Sandy. I think that we've taken better advantage of them for our students. We've actually had, like for our PhD students, a lot of them have actually had Fulbrights as part of their training. And then for many of them, it's been like a way to do the research that it's harder to do now in the United States. So for example, I have a transgender student in social work PhD program that has been in many of my classes that does work with sex workers that then try to transition to non-sex work. You can't really study that in the US. Can you study in Canada? Very easily. Like that's where all the scientists doing the great work in women's health and empowerment is coming out. And then so she got a Fulbright to do it there. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to do that actually for research in the US like at all. So for some of them, it's been a little bit of a rescue. We've had Fulbrights come to us more than I think we've had our own faculty take advantage of it to go elsewhere. But as you said too, Sandy, I think like a lot of that resource has dried up as of late. We had a few faculty that were already interviewed and kind of high in the queue for consideration for Fulbright elsewhere where it's no longer available for them. So,
yeah. Okay.
So I don't think before this we took full advantage of it. I think we did a better job with our students to think about it than we did with our own faculty.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Very good.
I also wanted to ask a question sort of related to that student perspective. So I was wondering, like, what advice and tips you have for PhD students who are interested in health equity. I think that that sort of where they ostracize, still relatively received.
Right.
I'm wondering what advice you would give to us
Right.
thinking about how we can translate our research like that student you mentioned.
Right. Yeah. You know, again, thinking about what was communicated yesterday at NIH is interesting because they're, you know, I don't know that they, at this point, they would agree with the statement that it's being even discouraged. I think the language we have to use about it will have to change if you want to be successful. There's always been kind of a strategy in like grant writing and even scientific writing about like, how am I going to pitch this in a way where it would be appealing? So if you led with it's health equity work, then it's going to be a no. But if you said, I'm interested in a community that's more at risk for this chronic condition, and here's why, and you were just specific about labeling it, like what is it, what is the inequity? And then you know, from the NINR's language yesterday, as much of it as can be solution oriented, I think the last thing that NIH will fund right now is an investigation that's going to highlight a health inequity. Again, this isn't my perspective, it's NIH's from yesterday. But if you can say there is this inequity, or there's this, you'd have to say subpopulation difference or something by their current language, but I have a great solution so that people can benefit from this intervention no matter where they live and no matter what their background is. That would be like the new language of doing exactly what you would have done a month or 6 months ago, but you're just going to talk about it in a different way. That makes sense. I do think the US is going to fall behind, unfortunately, in the equity work, because in many ways we were leaders in that regard, and now we're not going to be, because there's going to be a lag. So it may be for you, there may be opportunities to study with teams abroad, even if it's short. We can come and spend a week with you and work with your lab, as there's this project we can do together, because now it's going to be foreign institutions that are the leaders in health equity research, not the US anymore. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know, look at the language from the NIH major initiatives now. There's 9 of them. NR&R, if you're interested in, you don't have to be interested in NR&R, but if you are, they changed the language of their areas of emphasis. Yes, like yesterday. That's publicly available on their website too. If you look at the language very carefully, there's language you can use to advance the work that you want to do.
How does that's working out?
I would see whoever's doing the good work. Like, you read a great paper and you're like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I really want to do that. It's often just a cold email, you know, whoever the corresponding author is. It's easy to find people's emails too. Like, I would just cold contact them and say, really love your paper. Love to have a conversation with you. I'll be really economic in my use of your time. Ask for 20 minutes to just tell you a little bit what I'm doing. If the conversation goes well, so do you ever have early career faculty from other countries come and spend a week or so with your lab to learn and to be collaborative in that way? Many do. I love it. When students come to work with my lab, I actually have them come to my classes too, so they can see what education is like. It's great. So most scientists would be like, sure. Yeah, as long as there's not an ask financially. So if you could, like, you'd essentially have to do it, right? So if you can figure out a way to get there and do it, most people say, yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely could work. If there's any part of it that you're envisioning being federally sponsored, it won't work. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you're here always, but specifically today too. The question was about, I just get excited about the question. The question was really about, is there a way to have like international labs where you have faculty from one country working with faculty from another country and do that in kind of a collaborative way? I think it depends on what you mean by lab. So if it's lab, meaning like there's physical space and there's like sampling or processing of samples, that's what the NIH is really like harping on as a no-go. And in fact, you pretty much have to ensure that if it's a US funded grant, that there's none of that occurring, even if there's no financial exchange. So for example, if you, like I have a colleague that doing work in many countries in Africa, I have a lot of subcontracts. One of them was actually like even processing data. The first round, she said, well, okay, well, there won't be a financial exchange. They've just offered to process the data for free. That's also not acceptable now. So actually, they can't be engaged with like any type of processing of data or information. So if you're thinking about lab as in like a wet lab or data processing lab of any kind, then and you're thinking of this being federally sponsored by the U.S., then right now I think it's a no-go. It would have been fine. In fact, I think there's a lot of examples where some of the money from a US federally funded grant does go to another country so that they can increase their infrastructure and then have a fabulous place to do all the types of work that we like to do, whether it's wet lab, whether it's data lab. But I think it's a little bit, it's not even tricky, it's a no-go right now. Hopefully that won't last very long. If there's another institution that's foreign and is interested in being the funder of that, that may be the great way to have it work. And then to invite faculty from the US to participate in that, I think right now that's the directionality that would be necessary. Yeah, I heard the language, you know, irrespective of a financial exchange for the first time yesterday, because it really used to just be, if there was a financial exchange, that's where the potential conflict came from or the concern came from. And now it's not even, like they can't even gift the services to you. Yeah, big change there. Questions? All right. All right. Well, thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for the very insightful and thought-provoking presentation. We really appreciate you being here. And Chris will be available for a few minutes if you want to have a one-on-one consultation with him. I also want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here. And also those of us who are online, we really appreciate your time and engagement. And I just want to remind you that we only do these global lectures twice a year, but we are also doing some very interesting webinars with University of Sydney. We are doing those more frequently. We have another one coming up in December. I hope you will be able to get time to participate. Thank you so much for your time.